Andy Mitten of United We Stand is with us, obviously, of course, writes for ESPN as well. Andy, good morning to you. How are you doing?
Good morning. Good to speak to you.
I just wanted to talk to you about it in the ESPN piece before we get to the whole Alexis Sanchez thing, because you spent some time with Anderson, who very much has become a cult figure for Manchester United fans and for football fans generally. What's Anderson at these days?
Anderson is the best paid player in Brazil, playing for a team called Internacional, who were the world champions in 2006. They currently want to get him off the wage bill because they can't really afford him. So he's likely to move quite soon, perhaps to Mexico, maybe to the United States. I spent a lot of time with him in Brazil. He turned up 24 hours late, but then I spent 24 hours with him. He gave me a fantastic interview. He's a real character. You can see why Sir Alex Ferguson absolutely loved him, and a lot of the players did as well. And while people might say that he didn't fully fulfil his talent, especially towards the end of his time at Old Trafford, and I think that's a fair comment, he would argue that he was doing more at 15 and 16 than most professional footballers did in their life. He was scoring massively important goals when he was very, very young. And he was unfortunate with injuries as well. And if you look deeper into his background, as I did, this is a lad who lost his father when he was 11. He left home at 12. Things happened very fast when he was young. And he says, I've played at the top level for a long time, but he just has this real love of life. You can't help but like him. People just come up to him in the streets. He might frustrate you a bit if you were his manager, but Ferguson absolutely adored him. None of the players could work out why.
There's a brilliant piece in the article, and I recommend everybody goes and reads it. We'll tweet a link to it as well, where you talk about him ultimately taking Manchester United's last penalty in the penalty shootout to win the Champions League. And, you know, so many people actually forget or can't articulate exactly what they're going through at that precise moment, but he seems to remember it like as clear as day.
Yeah, this came an hour into the interview, and, you know, he'd really relaxed. He was talking, and we talked about some pretty heavy issues, and I wanted him to talk about it slowly because it was the most important goal of his life, although Gremio fans might disagree. He started crying. He started crying as he was talking about this penalty, and I got him to do a little video afterwards for 2 minutes. I just put it out there as a taster. It had 600,000 views. He's a real cult figure, and I think that a lot of United fans got very frustrated with him towards the end of his time at Old Trafford, but they tend to remember the better bits. They tend to remember the good games, and he had some great games, especially against Arsenal. And I'd say, why Arsenal? They say, we always kill Arsenal, kill, kill, kill. And someone who was maybe had an agent watching over him saying, you can't say that. He was just, you know, he was free, he was talking, and you often find that when players leave clubs, that they're much more interesting. And I like to interview. I did Dimitar Berbatov in October. He was fantastic as well. But spent a lot of time with Anderson. He's like, come on, we're going out tonight, we're going to go out, and sort of looking at me as if I was wrong because I couldn't stay out until 4 o'clock in the morning. It was his summer holiday, I might add. I'm like, I'm 44, I've got 2 children. Much as I like the idea of drinking caipirinhas with you all night, Anderson, I need to go to bed. But a journalistic dream, you know, he's very, very accommodating and very friendly. And as you see in the interviews, you know, he gives some fantastic stories. I said, so what are you going to do now? You're going to carry on playing? You're going to have more children? No, I have 5 children now, he said that. I get on well with all of the mothers, there's no problems. And he said it with such innocence that this is the Michael Douglas of Porto Alegre. But he did a lot when he was 15, 16, 17 on a football field, and he earned that move to Manchester United. Ferguson was a father figure to him because he knew that he didn't have his own father. And there's a human side that you don't always see to football players when you're making snap judgments about their performances at the weekend. And journalistically, I mean, I knew him because my wife's from his city. I didn't know him really well, but I have interviewed him before, and I felt that he trusted me, and he gave me a really good interview.
You mentioned being accommodated there by Ferguson, but one person who certainly took him under his wing was Cristiano Ronaldo. He let him live in his house actually for 7 months or so. He didn't pay a penny for that. Not that Ronaldo needed the money or anything. And the other thing I found very interesting was the picture we get of George Mendes via Anderson, because Mendes in the media naturally we see as quite a nuisance to football clubs. But from a player's perspective, he's obviously done some very, very good stuff, and Anderson is clearly very grateful for his help.
He is, and fans and clubs might view George Mendes differently, but players, they love him because they think he's watching out for them, and he got in big moves. He looked after him. He didn't walk away when the move was done. He had an employee of his company move to Manchester to look after him and to look after Ronaldo, and she became like a mother figure because Anderson's own relationship with his mother was not a good one at all. Really, really bad, and he was quite strong on this. And he said, I couldn't even sit at the same table as my mother. And the lady who Mendes employed became like a mother figure and really cared for him. So there's that whole human side. You've got an 18-year-old boy moving to Manchester. He's from Brazil. I've never seen English people before. They look really funny to me. And it's the type of comment that you might hear somebody from Europe going to Japan for the first time. But there's such innocence when he says it. And I'm thinking, do I look funny, Anderson, to you? But you do, because you're from a different part of the world to him. But he felt that Mendes had his best interests. Obviously, Mendes is not a miracle worker, but he's got Anderson some very, very good moves. And he got them at the right time as well. And Anderson could have walked away from Gremio, and that club didn't receive a penny, but he insisted they were paid. They got €6 million, which is a lot of money in Brazilian football. So even though he was a young lad, one with 2 or 3 mobile phones, one for the girls, he said, always need one for the girls. He had a conscience about looking after the club where he was adored.
I also have a feeling that maybe his role was a bit missold when he arrived, because he'd scored some big goals as a teenager. Everybody assumed that he was going to be this free-flowing number 10, passing, controlling games, but much higher up the pitch. Ultimately, he becomes kind of a linchpin midfielder, and maybe he's been sold as like, this guy's he's just going to be a defensive midfielder who occasionally scores goals. The expectations would have been a little lower for him.
He wanted to play in the role that you said, and 6 weeks in, when Sir Alex Ferguson wasn't playing him in that role, because Manchester United were already the best team in Europe, we were about to win the European Cup, Anderson said, I've had enough of this, I'm leaving. And then there was a turnaround in one game against Wigan where he started to play well. I mean, he'd never played in a club where there was so much competition for places. So the idea of squad rotation took some getting used to. He got injured. He wasn't always as professional as he should have been. One of the other players told me that he couldn't drive past McDonald's without stopping. And maybe if you're a top-level professional footballer, that's not going to be the best diet for you to have all the time after matches. But they tell it to you in such a way that you have to laugh. He used to say to Ferguson, well, he'd hug Ferguson for a start. He wouldn't shake his hand, give him a big hug, which is normal in this part of Brazil. And he'd say, like, how much you earn, how much you earn. And I don't think Ferguson had ever had a player calling him out before in front of the other players, asking him what his salary was. And I love stuff like that, because I think the only previous player who was like that was Wayne Rooney, where he'd say to Ferguson the day before the game, where you play me as a 9 or a 10. And Ferguson's like, wait a minute, who says you're playing? And Rooney's like, of course I am, I'm your best player. And he wasn't, Ronaldo was at the time, but that confidence that can come with young, prodigious talents, and Anderson was as a kid, and Rooney was as well.
I think when you look at Anderson, obviously he's incredibly unique for the reasons you've just outlined, but there's a certain element of him that makes him the perfect Alex Ferguson player, the person who might be perceived as not having the talent of your Cristiano Ronaldos, but somebody who, under the tutelage of Ferguson, can reach a very high ceiling. And it's hard to say now, when you look at the Premier League, let alone Manchester United, who those sort of players are. Perhaps the most comparable situation today is somebody like Jesse Lingard, who of course might prove everybody wrong and continue this vein of form for years and years to come, but at the same time you kind of look at him as somebody who was much maligned earlier on in the season and can produce some very important performances in big games, just kind of like Anderson did at times during his Manchester United career.
Yeah, I think that's a fair comment. Jesse's playing really well now and finding the level of consistency that you need if you're going to stay at Manchester United for a long time and be a first-team player rather than a squad player. Anderson struggled. He had a very good first season, but injuries knocked him back. That knocked his confidence back as well. And he was living in a strange country, and he liked it. He grew to love Manchester, and his English improved a lot because it was absolutely diabolical at the start. But he used that to endear other people to him, because he'd say, you know, my car no fly, and the players like, what? My car no fly? Well, obviously your car doesn't fly. and they'd all start hammering him because of his English, which was really funny and still is. Called the beach, beachy, carrick, carricky, house, housey, Facebook, Facebooky. But Anderson would then turn around to them and say, well, none of you speak any other languages apart from English, so who are you to pick me up? Come on, let's talk in Portuguese. And he was right. He's that street sharp humour. He's from the poorest background. He's looked after loads of his mates. I met them all, lots of them. And he's been quite wise as well. He has invested his money. And I think economically, if you look at someone like Lingard, it is different. He's from close to Manchester. They're earning a lot more money even now. And he's doing so well, Lingard, that Mourinho's now thinking ahead to next season and thinking, I'm going to have to change my plans a little bit here, because I was considering playing this player as a main forward, but Lingard's doing well. And not only is he scoring goals, as you said, he's scoring brilliant goals. And it's good to see, because the last month or two has not been great for Manchester United, because there's still this hangover of Manchester City being the better team. But there has been a lot of bright spots. 3 wins so far this year, and the former Lingard being another. What hasn't been is the atrocious weather, which when you edit a Manchester United fanzine and you have lads stood outside the ground selling it, it absolutely kills you, because people don't want to buy a paper-based product. It kills you as much as Anderson killed Arsenal. So we need an upturn in fortunes with the Mancunian weather.
But I think everybody can subscribe digitally these days, right? If is it $9.95?
Yeah, it's not expensive. I've kept the price the same for 10 years, but we love the paper edition as well. We think it's part of the match day culture to go past the fanzine sellers, but when it's raining heavily, people are slightly less inclined. It's just been a freak year. It's just been a freak year for terrible weather whenever we've brought a magazine out. Alexis
Sanchez obviously is less pressing when everybody is playing as well as they are at the minute, and yet you can't really pass up the opportunity to add a player like Alexis Sanchez. With City now, it looks like off the playing pitch, it looked like it was a straight slam dunk for Manchester United, but all of a sudden Antonio Conte, the bane of Jose Mourinho's life, has arrived, it seems from nowhere, to try and tempt Sanchez. How much of a loss would it be for Manchester United not to get Sanchez at this point?
Well, I think it'd be a plus to get him, because he's top player. I think he's in that bracket below your Messi, Ronaldo. I think it's fair to call him a world-class player. I saw a lot of him when he played for Barcelona, and he was good for Barca, and occasionally he was great, but he wasn't great enough. He scored a brilliant chip in a Clasico. I was there the day he arrived at Camp Nou. I spoke to him. He's still at a decent age. The transfer fee makes him look like a bargain. The wages less so. His agent is probably trying to ramp up interest between rival clubs to get a bigger cut himself. That can bring issues, because had he gone to Manchester City, and he might do, but City are saying that they're not doing it now, he would have been by a distance their best paid player. And someone like Kevin De Bruyne might have turned around and said, you know, you're good, but I'm better than you. And that can alter the whole pay structure, which could end up being very, very expensive for a club. Not that I have much sympathy for Manchester City in the way that they budget. United have obviously got money as well. And with City and Chelsea, there are 2 financial rivals there that weren't around 15 years ago. And this has pushed everything up for United. United went for him in 2011. He was second choice from the player's perspective. First was Barca, second was United, third was Manchester City. He ended up going to Barcelona. I think he's versatile. He's very, very strong. When he signed for Barca, they made a big play of saying he's not this 1m90, 2m player. We don't buy them like that here. And Jose Mourinho does buy players like that. So that's a little bit of a surprise. But I'd welcome him. I think every United fan I've spoke to would really welcome him, because he's a top-class player. And as we've seen in the last month or two, United are still somewhere behind the best teams in England and certainly in Europe.
We've also seen in the last month or two that Sanchez can be a little bit disruptive in the dressing room, and people have said that this could be an issue between himself and Jose Mourinho, that it could be a match made in hell. But in reality, is Sanchez, he's exasperated at being an Arsenal player rather than any sort of tension in the dressing room. And you suspect that if he goes into a dressing room, which even though it is Jose Mourinho managing the whole operation, it does seem a little bit more harmonic than things are at the Emirates Stadium, that things would be okay between himself and Jose. So I'm interested in how those 2 characters would compare and contrast.
I think they'll be all right. Players like Jose, for all of his faults, and he's a very high-profile figure, and you can read about them and listen about what's wrong with Mourinho every day. Players do like him, and he does have a way of getting the best out of these big, potentially disruptive characters. Ibrahimovic has been a difficult character for some managers at some of his previous clubs. I think Sanchez, as you say, is frustrated at Arsenal. You're not going to win trophies there. They're a huge club. Arsenal fans' frustrations are very well known. You see this bubbling undercurrent against Arsene Wenger all the time. I think Arsene Wenger's a legendary manager, but if you've grown up watching Arsenal win occasional league titles and now you're nowhere near, you're going to be frustrated, because that whole move to Ashburton Grove, the Emirates, was supposed to be about putting Arsenal on a more equal footing with the best, so they could compete with Manchester United for transfers, and yet they've lost Robin van Persie to Manchester United, and he wanted to go because he wanted to win league titles, and he did just that. And I think Alexis Sanchez wants the same. If he's money-minded as well, he's going to get more money, and that is a factor. You know, I don't think Alexis Sanchez grew up in Chile thinking one day I'll play for Manchester United. There's certainly a financial aspect to this, but I wouldn't worry too much about Mourinho getting the best out of him, because he'll also know that he's had a bad press, a bad reputation, and he can't keep burning bridges. Sanchez cannot continue to be like he is currently at Arsenal, where he's clearly an unhappy figure.
If Kevin De Bruyne could look around at Sanchez and go, I'm better than you, could Paul Pogba not do the same? And does it not have the same material impact on the pay scale at Manchester United?
Yeah, he could do. And that's a factor that the clubs have got to work out when they're negotiating, and maybe turn round to Sanchez and say, you're very good, but you're not better than Pogba, you're not getting more money than Pogba. Or maybe there's other ways of doing it. What United do a lot is they incentivise the deals. It's not just a straight, we're paying you this much money a week. They don't get paid weekly anyway, even though the figures are always quoted weekly. And they could say, if you're as good as you think you are and you help and this team wins the league title or the European Cup, you're going to get a lot more bonuses that way. Another thing Manchester United do, and they did this to Pogba, is they say, you're joining a far, far bigger club than Manchester City, far bigger club than Chelsea, and even in terms of social media, a far bigger club than Real Madrid. And Real Madrid are obviously huge and massively successful. They've been the best team in the world the last couple of years. But when United went for Pogba and they knew Madrid wanted him, they said to Pogba, you'll be number 5 or 6 here. If you come to Man United, you will be the main man. We've got a higher average crowd, and United have got to accentuate their own positives, because if you're a player with a choice of living in Madrid or Barcelona or Manchester, Manchester's probably going to come third, and it will come behind London as well. Players love living in London, and so United have got to push their strengths, and one of them is their global support, and appeal to their egos. And they did it with Ibrahimovic, they did it with Pogba, and it's Manchester United. It's not a village football team. It's the most successful English football team.
You mentioned in that Anderson piece, actually, Andy, about Dimitar Berbatov and Robin van Persie, and Anderson saying that City wanted him, but they both chose Manchester United. I know it's a hypothetical situation at this point because City are out of the race for Alexis Sanchez, but do you think Sanchez would have chosen United over City if that was the head-to-head option he had?
I think he would have chosen to play with Pep Guardiola and gone to Manchester City. I think City are a better team than United at the moment. Guardiola is a manager who he knows and got on well with, played for in a very successful Barcelona team, although he only really caught the tail end of that, because I think he joined in 11 and Guardiola had left in 12. He played more under Tito Villanova, who liked him a lot. But you're asking here to choose between supermodels. If you're a footballer and you have a choice of Manchester City or Manchester United or Chelsea, and you're playing for Arsenal, who are a great club, then you're in a very, very rare and fortunate position. And you can also drive up your price of your wages, which he and his agent are clearly doing. One
last thing, Andy, Ryan Giggs obviously got the Wales job yesterday. You know Giggsy really well. Is he going to be a success at international management? Is this maybe the best way for him to cut his teeth as a manager?
I think it's a good job for him, and I really hope that he does well. I don't like the way he's sometimes portrayed as being completely clueless. I know that he did all his coaching badges while he was still a player, which is no mean feat. I spoke to him about players, and I've been on trips with him, and his depth of knowledge has really, really impressed me. He's extremely proud to take the Wales job. I think it was good stepping stone for Mark Hughes, who's gone on to be a relatively successful manager. Don't think he did Chris Coleman any harm. I also think it fits in with Ryan's other life now, because he's got this other life now after 27 years in the Manchester United bubble. He's enjoyed seeing a lot more of his family, watching Manchester United as a fan, watching Salford City doing his media stuff. And I think he's got a good chance there to try and get Wales into the European Championship. And with the expanded size, I think that's realistic. And I think if he doesn't do that, then he'll be criticised for that. He's got some very good players, so he's got a chance. I think all he ever wanted was a fair crack with a bit of stability. He didn't want to make the same mistakes as previous United legends like Bobby Charlton going to Preston. He wanted to go to a club where there was, or a job where he's working with a good level of players. His argument is, I've always worked with top level players. That's what I know. You can't send me down to the 5th division. And people can view and say you've got a sense of entitlement there, but I don't believe he does have. And I hope he's very successful.
Good stuff, Andy. Thanks a million for joining us this morning.
Thank you.